Good evening, everybody. Welcome. What a great crowd we have this evening. Let's give another round of applause for the combined bands that were on earlier. Nice job. It is nice to be back in Auburn. As Mr. Buzzy said, I did graduate from Embry-Riddle High School in 1984. I'm not ashamed to say 1984, a long time ago. And we also have another graduate from this program, or from the school in our program here, Miss Audrey Prentice. Let's give her a welcome to Auburn. And my oh my, what a great facility. I've been all over the nation and seen lots of facilities at high schools, and this is right up there with the best in the nation. You folks should be so proud of what you have. It's amazing. So we're excited to keep playing in here for the rest of our concert. The piece we opened up with was American Fanfare by John Watson. The next selection we're going to play for you this evening is entitled God of Our Fathers, written by Thomas Knox for the inauguration of President Reagan in 1981. It starts out with a slow procession and a little brass fanfare, and then the hymn itself is stated first with the clarinets. Then the piece speeds up a little bit, the hymn comes back and the brass, and then the piece speeds up again a little bit more and the hymn turns into a march. So you'll be able to hear all the different permutations of this beautiful piece of music. This is God of Our Fathers. next piece we're going to play is, we'll play selections from, or two movements from Sweet and Old American Dances by Robert Russell Bennett. The two movements are Scottish and Cakewalk, and they will be conducted this evening by our band's assistant conductor. She's also been the assistant conductor of the pep band and assisted with the marching band through her 2 years as a graduate assistant at the University of Maine. She's done an outstanding job in all aspects. She's taken a band to Ohio. She took a band to Allentown last week. She was with the band playing when we were down in Boston. And she's done a great job working with this group as well. And we're really sad to see her go after this year. So please welcome to the podium from Norwich, Maine, Miss Sarah Quayle. It's such a treat to work with these musicians making music every week, and it's such a treat to see them all grow in all ways as they're playing. Each year, the group within itself has a little competition to see who gets to play the featured solo on tour and on our spring concert. The piece that won this year is entitled Log Cabin Blues, which features the xylophone. And the xylophone was a very popular instrument in the early 1900s. Largely because it was very easy to record on the wax cylinders that were there at the time. And the style of music that was played by the xylophones was the ragtime style, which was also a very popular style of music during that period of time. The winner of this year's competition is a senior music performance major from Auburn, Maine. Let's welcome to the stage Mr. Kyle Aguirre. another round of applause. And now, the next piece we're going to play for you is a European march. It comes to us from Johannes Halvorsen, and it was part of a larger opera or musical, originally written for orchestra, transcribed for band. It's a wonderful march. It uses a European style, so it has more of a bouncy quality to it than an American march. Also, in the use of percussion, it kind of has some Middle Eastern influence with tambourine, triangle, and cymbals being dominant colors in there. It features our clarinets and flutes throughout. So this is Entry March of the Boyars. Thank you. Thank you. Our next selection is a relatively new selection. It's Julie Drew's Sixth Symphony, and it's the first movement of that Sixth Symphony. The entire symphony is entitled The Blue Marble, and the first movement is entitled The Blue Marble. It's a multimedia piece that we're not able to tour with all of that, but the music stands on its own very, very well. And if you'd like to see the entire production of it, our final concert at the university on April 24th, we will be doing the final production of that. So if you can get there for that, you'll be able to see and hear all that goes with it. The first movement is supposed to depict life on Earth, the sparkling sunrise, and then the gradual hustle and bustle of life and dancing and general happiness of the world. So this is the first movement of Blue Marble Symphony by Julie Drew. Thank you, thank you. Next piece is something a little bit slower. It's entitled Adagio, which the title means slow. It was written by David Holson, one of 3 hymn song based pieces that he wrote hymn song to Lowell Mason, hymn song for Philip Bliss, and Adagio, kind of a trio of pieces that he wrote. This is a wonderfully simple piece. It starts out very simply with a single color and adds colors and majesty as we grow. About 2/3 of the way through the piece, it reverses and ends where it starts. This is Adagio. completely different. The next piece is Freelance March, written by John Philip Sousa. This is from one of his operettas, and it's a unique march, and it kind of represents something that's going on in the operetta. Freelance is a freelance or a mercenary, a military person who starts on one side and then ends up fighting for the other side by the end. And hence the march starts in 6/8 and then ends in 2/4, which is somewhat unusual for Sousa's marches. And in this march also, we would like to feature our piccolo section, so watch and listen for that. I'm sure you'll know when that's going to happen. So this is Freelance March. Thank you all so much. We're getting down to our last couple of pieces here, and I'd like to take a moment to thank Mr. Buzza and the combined bands and the food that we had. We can't tour without that type of support, so we'd like to thank you for that support. Let's thank them, Dan. I'd like to thank also, we have two faculty members back there, Dr. David Stern on tuba and Dr. Dan Barrett on trombone, filling in at the last minute for some students who got ill and such and couldn't make tours. So without this type of support, these students wouldn't be able to do the things they do, and I appreciate our faculty so much. So let's give them a big round of applause. And lastly, I'd just like to thank these students back here. Without these students, I would have nothing to wave my hands in front of. I wouldn't be able to make music, and it's wonderful to have such great people to make music with and to tour with. This tour started out, it's a fairly young group and lots of new people in new positions, and right now we're ready to go. We could go another 3 weeks, and it would be a great thing. What do you think, another 3 weeks, folks? Yeah. But what? Surprised the bus isn't going home tonight. They're just wonderful to work with, and I appreciate them so much. So thank you to them from me. It's been a joy. This is our 8th concert in 3 days. And it's been wonderful. We'll go home. We have our final concert on the 24th. And if any of you can be there for that, we'd love to have you at the concert. Write me an email, and I'll make sure we get some tickets set aside for you for that event. The next piece we're going to play is called Incantation and Dance. It was written in the 1960s by a composer named John Barnes-Chance. It's a unique piece in that this is one of the first pieces that uses percussion in a different manner. Heretofore, the pieces that use percussion were like a march. It was used to keep time and things like that. There was no thought beyond that. And in this piece here, John takes the percussion and uses them to introduce the actual motives that the rest of the piece is based on. So, the way it starts in Incantation, it's kind of a slow, mysterious statement in the flutes and some low instruments, making some mysterious sounds, and then it grows a little bit, and you hear the hiss of the maracas, and then the percussion states the themes. There's a little interlude there, then all of a sudden the themes come back in the wind instruments, and the whole piece develops from there. I think you're really going to enjoy this. It features our percussion section and all the different sections playing some very intricate melodies and rhythms. This is Incantation and Dance. Thank you. We've got a great audience tonight. Again, I'd like to thank our hosts and thank again the students who performed before us. We're going to close our program with a song that helps Maine be the way life should be. Do we have any Maine alumni out there? Stand up and clap and sing along. And if you're not a Maine alumni, just stand and clap and sing along with the starting song.